what if you were like the youngest of something, the youngest actor in theater, the youngest president of the United States, the youngest senator in the Senate? Well, you will have a lot of pressure on you, but if you have all the right tools in your life, then you can hack it. General MacArthur was the youngest general at a very young age. General MacArthur, he had a lot of military careers, and that's my topic. Background info. General MacArthur was born on January 26, 1880 in Little Rock, Arkansas. He was the son of Arthur MacArthur, a high-ranking military figure. He attended West Texas Military Academy while his father was posted in San Antonio, but he graduated at West Point Academy, New York at the top of his class. At age of around 22 to 23 years old, he was sent to the Philippines in 1903 and was promoted to first lieutenant a year later. He and his father became aide-de-camp for Teddy Roosevelt in 1906, and he was an official observer in this military campaign called the Veracruz Expedition, and was promoted to major. So like 4 years, in the span of 4 years, he became from first lieutenant to major. So that's pretty amazing. And then he also participated in World War I. He commanded the 42nd Division in Western Front in France and was promoted to brigadier in August 1918. And he was the youngest divisional commander in France. When he returned home, he became brigadier general and the youngest ever superintendent of West Point Military Academy, where he graduated from. So, as you can see, at a very young age, he was the youngest in just about anything related to military. In 1922, MacArthur was sent back to the Philippines to command the military district of Manila. Was the youngest general ever, the youngest man ever to become general at only 43. And he was also president of the American Olympic Committee in 1928. And he was appointed chief of staff in the U.S. Army in 1930, becoming the youngest man that has ever held that title. And during that time as chief of staff, he modernized the American Army, making it like bigger, drawing more people into the Army, and stronger. As you can see, he was the youngest man to have such great achievements like this. But MacArthur did make some mistakes. In June 1932, MacArthur attacked the Bonus Army in Washington, D.C., this was during the time of the Great Depression, and so many military officials wanted bonus pays for their services in World War I, and they were getting fed up because they weren't getting their pay. And MacArthur attacked them, justifying that the U.S. was about to become a communist revolution. And this radical journalist named Drew Pearson attacked MacArthur with confidential information he received from the general's ex-wife Louise Cromwell and love letters from MacArthur's mistress. And MacArthur was forced to defeat in court. MacArthur filed suit against his opponents, but his opponents fought back. In 1935, Franklin D. Roosevelt sent MacArthur back to the Philippines to organize the defense. The general retired 2 years later, so he would be about 50, around his 50s, but he stayed on the island and became the country's military advisor. But in June of 1941, FDR called MacArthur back into duty as a major general and tasked him with mobilizing the Philippine Army. He made the Air Force bigger, he got planes into the Philippines, and he got men into the Army. As you can see, he knows how to make an army. But after the Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the Philippines were attacked by Japanese pilots and carried out airstrikes on the Philippines and destroyed half of MacArthur's air force. As Japan's army conquered many Filipino forts, MacArthur withdrew his troops to the Bataan Peninsula, and he was called to escape to Australia. So And there the American forces were reorganized, and MacArthur became the supreme commander of the Southwest Pacific area. To establish and protect communications between the South Pacific and Australia, MacArthur defeated the Japanese at Coral Sea and Midway, destroying all of Japan's naval carriers. So that gave the U.S. Army a big, huge disadvantage because Japan really needed those Navy carriers to conquer the South Pacific. During the war, MacArthur developed his famous island hopping tactics. This meant that where his troops landed on the weak, vulnerable islands and avoided contact with the Japanese forts in strong fortified islands. So MacArthur was able to avoid contact with Japan and engaging them in battle, and this drastically reduced the number of U.S. casualties. In 1944, MacArthur reclaimed the Filipino island of Leyte by defeating the Japanese in the Leyte Gulf, which was the largest naval engagement in history. And this was a great U.S. military victory on their part. He continued to defeat the Japanese at Manila a year later in 1945, and he continued to attack Japan, and his last operation was at Okinawa, Japan, which was a big military stronghold. There was a month-long battle, and there were several casualties. There were some Americans, but it was mostly Japanese, by like the hundreds of thousands. And after like a month-long battle, Okinawa was finally captured, and Japan was forced to surrender in August of 1945. MacArthur was named Supreme Commander for the Allied powers, and after the war, Harry S. Truman tasked him to help Japan with becoming more stable, which he successfully did. In 1950, there was the Korean War, and MacArthur was commander of the United Nations Force. Truman wanted to limit the war on only Korea, but MacArthur disagreed, wanting to attack Chinese forces, and he openly stated his disagreements to everyone in the U.S. And Truman decided to remove MacArthur from commander of the United Nations Force. And after that, MacArthur was no longer involved with the military. So in his later life, MacArthur was chairman of the board of Remington Rand Corporation, and he passed away on April 5th, 1964 in Washington. So the reason I decided to pick MacArthur was because he did his military campaigns in the Philippines, and I'm partially Filipino, so I just felt some sort of connection with that, and I found it so interesting. And my mother was from Leyte, which was one of the first islands that MacArthur captured, and I wanted to really do something, to do a report on him. So, and that concludes my presentation.